Uh, Up till now, we have discussed in rural marketing the definition of rural marketing and how rural marketing poses an attractive opportunity for the marketers. And while deliberating upon rural marketing and the opportunities that it presents for the marketers, we have also touched upon very briefly the challenges that a marketer may have to face. Now this is time for us to discuss these challenges in a little detail, because as is said, forewarned is forearmed. So if you are forewarned, if you are provided warning in time, then naturally you would be prepared for the contingencies, and that is what we are trying to do. This is the skill that we are trying to inculcate. So whenever we are planning to venture into rural markets, what all challenges we may face and how can we prepare ourselves to meet those challenges. So the first thing that we need to know is that rural marketing is challenging because the nature of rural markets is such that the population is scattered. What do we mean by scattered? Have you ever seen some villages in rural Uttarakhand, the hill district specifically of Uttarakhand? You would find that the dwellings are not located close by. They are relatively at a distance from each other. If you compare it with the dwellings in the urban areas of the state, you will find that in hilly areas, in rural areas, you would find that the dwellings are situated maybe at some distance. Why? Generally the people also have their land along with their dwellings. So naturally dwellings are generally scattered in a particular village, in a particular rural area. You don't find the houses lined up one by one as you would find in a well-planned town or the urban area. So if you compare with the urban Pithoragarh to the rural Pithoragarh, you will find urban Pithoragarh, there would be proper localities, colonies with houses lined up, but that would not be the case with rural Pithoragarh. So this is one problem with the rural markets. The population is scattered. So in a way you would be covering much less population in a rural area than you would in an urban area, even after setting up an outlet. Take the example of your neighborhood retail store. You would find that in the neighborhood retail store, that particular retail store owner would be catering to a large number of households, families, while that is not the case in the rural areas because the dwellings are far off, and naturally this would increase the distance from the retail shop to the dwellings, and naturally the retail shop owner would not be able to cater to that many number of families, that many number of households. So this is one major problem in rural markets. Now what happens because of this? As I already mentioned, distribution constraints. Now let us assume that you are planning to set up, let's say, a distribution outlet in some rural parts of Pithoragarh. Let's take example of the Gurna area, right? Suppose you have set up your distribution outlet in Gurna area. How many people would you be catering to? Suppose, let's say, you are a trader who deals in FMCG products and you have set up your retail store somewhere near Gurna. How many villages would you be able to cater to? You would may be able to cater to 6 or 7 villages, not beyond that, and at most 600 to 700 families, which means you would only be selling to 600-700 families. And this is the figure on the higher side that I'm quoting. On the other hand, if the same retail store owner opens up an outlet in urban Pithoragarh, let's say in the middle of the Simalgarh market, he would be catering to far more number of families, far more number of households, and that is why he will be able to generate more income also. Here we are assuming that there is no difference in terms of the competitive intensity. So all other things being the same, it would be far more easier for you to distribute your products in the urban markets than in the rural markets. Right? So this is one major issue with the rural markets. Another major problem with the rural markets is that the customers in the rural customers are generally more price sensitive than the urban customers. For example, what do we mean by price sensitivity? If you increase the prices of a particular item both in the rural as well as in the urban markets, the probability of the sales declining is always going to be higher in the rural markets, because there the customers are generally more price sensitive. They are more sensitive to increase in prices. However, this may also lend you an advantage. What advantage? See, as and when you increase your prices, the sales are going to decline, and that is going to be a more prominent phenomenon in rural markets because the customers there are more sensitive to price changes. So they would respond faster, which means if you increase your prices, the sales are going to decline faster in the rural markets. But what if you decrease your prices? Now this becomes a great opportunity for you. If you decrease your prices, the urban customers are not that sensitive to the changes in the price levels. So naturally, when you reduce your prices, the sales generally climb up, all other things being equal. But this phenomena would be more pronounced in the rural markets because they are more sensitive. So yes, this is a constraint in the rural markets, but then when you are decreasing your prices because of various reasons, then this is also going to lend you an advantage, and the advantage is that when you decrease your prices, the sales are going to climb at a higher rate, at a faster pace in the urban markets, in the rural markets, not in the urban markets. Why? Because the rural customers are more sensitive to changes in the price level. But then it is a constraint in the sense that now it becomes very, very difficult for you to increase your prices without having to worry about the reduction in sales. Again, not only are the rural customers more price sensitive, but their purchase pattern also depends on the income flow. Now this is something that happens with almost all the customers. They purchase according to the income flow. You would find out, if you go to a retail shop owner, you would find out generally at the beginning of a month, generally customers buy in cash, while towards the end of the month they start buying on credit. Why? Because the customers generally, if they are salaried people, they do get paid at the beginning of the month. So they have cash with them, and that is what they use to buy products. But towards the end of the month, what happens is, since the cash supply is inadequate, they have already used up all the cash or most of the cash which they had earned as salary in the beginning of the month. They would go for credit purchases. Udhar pe mal khareedna. And you can always go to any retail store owner in your neighborhood and you can cross-check whether this actually happens or not. So what I'm trying to tell you is that purchases generally do depend on the income flow of the customers. There's no doubt on that. But the problem with the rural customers is that since rural customers, most of them, they are engaged in agriculture. Most of them, they are not salaried people like, let's say, me. They are not salaried people, so they are not going to get paid their salary in the month, beginning of the month. Since they depend on agriculture, most of them, they will be getting some cash only and only when they sell their products in the market, and that would only happen at the end of a cropping season. You know, there are various cropping seasons here in India. In October, November, Rabi crop is sown. The various Rabi crops include sugar cane and wheat, and it is harvested somewhere around March, April. Then we have the Zaid season also, in which some seasonal vegetables and fruits are grown like cucumber, watermelon, muskmelon. So it is a 2-month period. Around May, April, May, you sow the seeds, and by the month of June, or let's say the beginning of June, you harvest the crop. And then we have the Kharif season. The main crop of the Kharif season in India is rice. We also have cotton. There are other crops also. These crops are grown somewhere around June, July, and they are harvested somewhere around October, November. What I'm trying to tell you is that, now this is again a very important piece of information for us, because if we are studying rural marketing, we need to know our customers well, and we need to know how do they earn their living, and when do they have sufficient availability of cash, and when they are short of cash. So this is something that we need to know, and that is why I have shared this particular information regarding the cropping pattern in here in India. Now you should understand that the Rabi crop shall come to market somewhere around March, April. The Zaid would come around June, and Kharif would come somewhere around September, October. Then only during these months only, the farmer, the rural customers who are predominantly farmers, they are going to sell their products in the market. They are going to have their harvest and sell their products in the market, sell their crops in the market, and they are going to get some cash. Which means you would find that they will have more cash available with them somewhere around March, April, somewhere around June if they are growing the Zaid crops also, and somewhere around October if they are growing the Kharif crops also. Which means that their demand for discretionary items would not remain same throughout the year. You need to understand this. The demand for discretionary items would not remain same. And probably I had discussed this earlier also. See, discretionary items are those items in which it is based on the discretion of the customer whether he is going to purchase a particular product or not. It is not a basic necessity. He can live without it. For example, if you are purchasing television, if you are purchasing a mobile phone, it can be considered to be a discretionary purchase because it depends on your discretion. You may or may not want to purchase. It's not absolute necessity for you. You can still survive without mobile phones or WhatsApps. So that is a discretionary purchase. On the other hand, if you are purchasing salt, of course, for purpose of consumption, then it is a very basic necessity that you have. It is a necessity product, and this cannot be called a discretionary purchase, right? So while the rural customers, who are again predominantly farmers, land-owning families, while for them the basic necessities would be purchased throughout the year, but the discretionary items, let's say gold, two-wheelers, consumer durables, these kind of items would be purchased in particular months of the year. And I've told you what these months are. March, April, because they've sold their Rabi crop and they've got cash in return which they can spend for these kind of discretionary purchases, again somewhere around June and somewhere around September, October. So now this becomes a big issue for the marketer. They cannot produce only in few months because the rural customer is going to purchase only few months of the year. He is not going to maintain his purchase throughout the year. So this becomes a big problem for the marketer. So in March, April, you'll have to keep your retail stores stocked up, because you know that the rural customers are going to demand the product. They have the cash available with them. They've just sold their produce and they have the cash available with them, and they'll be coming to buy the product. So you have to keep your retail points adequately stocked up somewhere around March, April, somewhere around June, and somewhere around September, October. So this now becomes a constraint. This now becomes a challenge for the marketer who is trying to cater to the rural customers also. He'll have to produce throughout the year, but he'll only be selling in particular months of the year, and he'll definitely be earning some revenue out of these sales only in particular months of the year, right? Now another issue with the rural markets is that the literacy rate is much lower, generally much lower in rural markets than in urban markets. The customers in rural areas, they are less literate, or in terms of literacy levels, the literacy levels are lower. They are less educated than the customers in the urban markets. Now what is the implication of this particular problem, this particular issue? The implication is that suppose you are trying to sell a product which requires a lot of technical information to be given to the customers. Let's say you are trying to sell a computer, and for that computer, even in mobile phones, suppose for example if you want to sell your mobile phones in rural markets, there are so many technical specifications that you will be talking about. For example, the RAMs, the number of processors, and the quality of processors, the quality of the camera that you have, the storage capacity, data storage capacity, or the capacity of the battery that you are using in the mobile phones. So these are all technical information, and to sell your product you may have to provide this technical information to the customers, right? The same is the case with consumer durables like a mixer grinder, like a television, like a refrigerator. So in all these cases you will have to provide the customers with some kind of a technical information. And let us talk more specifically about rural markets. You might be selling them tractors, threshers, tillers. All these kind of agriculture equipments also have to be sold. Again, you would need to provide them technical information, but since the literacy levels are relatively lower than the urban markets, it is going to be more difficult for you to inform the customers about the attributes in your products and to convince him about the quality of your products. So this becomes a big problem for a rural marketer. You know what happened only recently? You must have come across this particular news item. Our Prime Minister only recently appealed to the citizens of the country to observe the norm of social distancing. Now what is social distancing? And you know, in the wake of COVID-19 crisis, social distancing means you keep a distance whenever you are interacting with somebody else in the market or in some public area, so that if the other person is infected with coronavirus, you also don't catch the infection, right? So that is why you have to maintain social distancing. But when the Prime Minister came to know that social distancing, again this is a terminology which is basically derived from English language, and there are so many people in India, they are living in rural areas and they may not be that well versed with English, and there are so many other people also in other parts of the country also, not only rural areas, but I'm talking specifically about rural areas. They are not well versed in English. So what did he do? And he understood that since the people in our rural areas, they are not well versed with English, they do not understand what social distancing is. So the message was actually getting lost. What Prime Minister was saying, it was actually not reaching the rural folks, because they were not able to understand what the Prime Minister means by saying social distancing. So This feedback must have reached the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister did what? In his latest broadcast, he was addressing the panchayats across the country, and instead of social distancing, he used a terminology. He probably said "do gaj ka fasla," something of this sort, so that people in rural areas also understand the message that he is trying to communicate to them, that you need to keep some physical distance whenever you are there in a public place and interacting with somebody else. So social distancing would have been okay with the urban markets, but in the rural markets you had to convert it into a "do gaj ka fasla" ya "do haath ka fasla." So these kind of modifications will have to be brought in by the marketer if he wants to sell in the rural market, which means if he is coming up with a particular ad, a particular promotional campaign in the urban markets, the same promotional campaigns cannot be used in the urban markets. You will have to certainly modify them, because the customers in the rural markets, they are not that literate, they are not that well educated, they may not have that good an understanding of languages like English. So you may have to modify your promotional campaigns, you may have to modify your messages, you may have to, just like our Prime Minister did, he modified his message, and instead of social distancing he started talking about the "do gaj ka fasla" or "do haath ka fasla." So this is what you'll have to do as a marketer. So this is one more constraint which is there in rural marketing. Some of you might be wondering whether this particular example is appropriate here. You are saying that, okay, the Prime Minister is just communicating a message. How does it become relevant? What is its relevant for rural marketing? See, again, when Prime Minister is delivering a particular message for the citizens of the country, basically he is marketing an idea. He is trying to sell it to the citizens of the country. He is basically trying to ensure that the citizens actually understand his idea, understand his message, and are convinced that the message is worth paying attention to, and then accordingly change their behavior. This is what the whole intention is. So this in a way is marketing of ideas, which again is part of marketing. In marketing you do market ideas as well. It's not as if you only market goods or services. You market places, you market events. IPL is being marketed. You market places like Taj Mahal or Devbhoomi Uttarakhand. You also market ideas. Cigarette smoking is bad for health. Likewise, you are saying in the current times, social distancing would keep you safe from coronavirus. So that was also some kind of marketing only, and that is why I have taken up that example. It's very much relevant here also. And you need to understand the impact that the message would have made now that the Prime Minister changed the terminology that he used from social distancing to "do gaj ka fasla" or "do haath ka fasla." Is this understood? Now let us move over to some more challenges that we face in the rural markets. Another problem with the rural markets is that they are more dogmatic in their beliefs, more conservative in their beliefs. They've got traditional beliefs. For example, one traditional belief is that turmeric powder, which probably is called haldi in Hindi, is good for health. So whenever if somebody is suffering from, let's say somebody has got a fracture, so they will have him drink milk in which turmeric powder is mixed. They will make him have turmeric in milk also. Now this is the kind of traditional belief that they have, and it becomes very, very difficult at times for the marketers to change those beliefs. Until unless you change those beliefs, the rural customer is not going to purchase your product, mind you. So what are you going to do? You will have to change these beliefs, but they are really very strongly held by the rural customers, and it becomes really difficult for the marketers to change these beliefs. For example, somewhere around late 1980s and in the beginning of 1990s, When the FMCG majors like HUL and PNG, they wanted to expand into rural markets in a big way, they found it really difficult to change the beliefs of the rural folks regarding what is good for their oral health. Oral health, basically the teeth. What is good for their teeth and what is not good for their teeth. People in many areas, it was found that people in many areas, they used koila, to clean up their teeth. And these companies, including HUL and PAG, found it really difficult to change that belief, because unless you change that belief, nobody is going to purchase your toothpaste. And actually, rubbing coal on your teeth is not going to help your teeth much. It's not going to be healthy for your teeth also. So that was a belief which was not rooted in any logical, it was not based on any scientific evidence. It was not based on any logic. So the task for the marketer was to not only change those beliefs, which were not productive also for the holders of the belief, for the rural folks. Then only once you are able to change those beliefs, then only you can sell your products, then you can only sell your toothpaste to the rural folks. So now this becomes again a very important issue as far as the rural markets are concerned. So these are the various challenges that you have to face in the rural markets. And once you know the challenges, right, I like I said right in the beginning of the session here, once you know about these challenges, you can be prepared to handle these challenges. You can accordingly modify your strategies, and that is why I said the strategies which work in urban markets may not work in rural markets. Why? In urban markets, populations are not scattered. You find a very high density of population in a particular area. Large number of people, large number of families live. There are no distribution constraints. Customers are generally less price sensitive. They are generally more literate. They are more educated. They are more well informed. Their salaries are credited to their accounts on a monthly basis. So the income flow is almost constant throughout the year. So there are so many differences in urban markets and rural markets. And if you apply the same models and if you apply the same practices which you have been using successfully in urban markets, if you apply the same practices to rural markets, you are bound to fail. And so many marketers have failed just because of this. So you have to be conscious of this fact that whenever you are going to the rural markets, you have to prepare yourself to meet these challenges. How to meet these challenges? This is what we'll be discussing in our unit 3, where we'll talk about the modifications that you need to bring about in your marketing mix, that is in product, place, price and promotion, to be successful in the rural markets. So thank you very much for your time.